you're pretty reluctant to intervene when people make comments. So going back to the position, I see communicating Parliament as a key part of my role. We have a number of people in the room, but not everyone will be aware that we are about to try an engagement strategy, or about to move into an engagement strategy on a parliamentary basis. And IPU has noted, engage with people authentically and you'll build confidence. And the flip side of this is that if you make a mess of it, it can actually lead quite quickly to a loss of trust. There are a few things that we do. Every sitting day, I record a video on what's coming up in the House. That's shared on the Parliament TV, Facebook, Twitter, both the Parliament and my own. And there's quite a lot of retweeting, especially when I involve other people in it. And I'm trying to do that on a more frequent basis, get another MP in or get someone in from outside so that we can just, through their contacts, increase the number of people who are aware of what's happening. And we can also use it to draw attention to what else is happening and locate Parliament in sort of wider endeavours. So, one example. Right, there you go. Right. Volume, please. So we're not going to bother going any further with that. What we are going to say is that during Volunteer Week, we got a volunteer policy analyst from Volunteering New Zealand who joined me to talk about that work and how that made a difference for him getting a paid policy analyst job. So that worked pretty well. So it's an attempt to demystify Parliament. I try and use plain language and try and explain some of the more mystical language. And the final example I'd like to give is the e-petition system, which has been introduced over the last 6 months. I think it's a really good way for people to interact with Parliament. Anyone can launch a petition, brief synopsis, work with the clerk's office, get it out there and see what sort of support it has. There's been an increase in the number of petitions submitted, wide range of topics, and I think it has the potential to be really positive for the relevance of Parliament. That said, there's a bit of a test case here for how Parliament responds to those petitions. They go to select committees. If they're not well handled or not handled in a timely fashion by the committees, then I think there's a real problem that the parliamentary system will fall into further disrepute. And so there is a test there. And I'll say, as a member who's presented a couple of sort of interesting but small petitions recently, I'm still not happy with the way that our select committees prioritise the business. I'm probably not happy with the fact that they seem to think that parliamentary recesses are times for working out in the electorates or other places rather than having their select committees sit. And as a result of the priority which is often given to government business, things which should be considered and which people are putting a lot of hope in sometimes don't get the consideration that they should. So if people put a lot of effort into promoting petitions and they disappear into a hole, then quite rightly there'll be disenchantment will occur. The one other point that I will make is that I am looking forward to our next review of standing orders. I think there are some better ways that we can both improve the way that we do things and have better engagement with people, and that's it's always a bit of a risk, but my experience is generally the first review of standing orders after a change of government is a time when you're most likely to get significant change. And one of the things that I'm hoping is that the current government remembers very well the points that they made when they were opposition, and the policies that they indicated to the Standing Orders Committee when they were in opposition, and possibly the current opposition insist that they carry through with those policies. But that, we're obviously a year or so away from testing some of that. Right, bit longer than I meant to. People got questions that they want to ask over the next 5 or 6 minutes? Oh, that's really easy, isn't it? It is one of the things that's really hard as Speaker, other than the very occasional trip to a select committee. I don't ever feel like, other than, a little bit of testing every now and then in the House, I don't feel like I get a proper working over. I would have thought with a group like this, that's an opportunity to test me on this or other topics.
You want a proper working over?
Well, I wouldn't mind a nice question, a testing question.
I've got one. It's just a little question. Are you allowed, do the select committees have to do what you say? If you say, I want you to meet in the recess?
No, the short story is the decisions on the meetings for the select committees are first of all for that committee, and failing that for the chair. Either method can be used for calling them. The only thing I ever get to do is to, I think the business committee or me set first meeting.
So obviously the pressures are happening on parliaments all over the world to modernise, to deal with increasing disenchantment. So I'm just wondering how you see what you're doing in the context of what else is happening everywhere else. Are you ahead of the game? Are other parliaments doing similar things? Are you watching what other parliaments are doing and trying to learn? How does the situation go?
The short story is, especially amongst the Commonwealth parliaments and Australia, Canada, UK, which are probably the most like the way that we run things. We do watch each other and we talk about what's occurring, and conferences like the ASPG conferences, is a good place to, and speakers, Pacific speakers conferences are good places to exchange ideas. There's also, with the clerks, there's some of that work goes on as well. On the question, I think we are ahead of the game generally. The UK probably obviously puts a lot more resource into it and have been thinking about things some more, but we have the still an accessibility based on our scale, which is better. I will say, and it's part of the now not going very far appropriations review report, that in my experience of being a member of Parliament, the massive increase in the number of electors represented by elected MPs has actually made communication and contact, there's much less of it compared to what used to occur when effectively there were about half the number of people in the electorates as there are now. And I think that, I'll say this slightly carefully, and I think the relationship between MPs and their leaders has changed in the time that I've been a member of Parliament, and people do focus more on making leaderships happy than they might have previously about making their electors happy, and there's some important stuff on that. I think getting people, especially younger people, to understand how the system works better, how they can become involved in it, adapting the system to make it easier for them to be involved is one of the ways that we can avoid sort of massive unpredictable change, which generally I think has been unhealthy for countries where whether it's a sort of like a far right thing or a Brexit type thing occurring mainly because of disenchantment. I think the disenchantment with our political system resulted in the MMP. And last time, you just don't know what might happen if something else happens.
You're really talking about engagement. Engagement is a two-way thing, and feeding information out and getting a bit back is still short of engagement, isn't it? But what I'm picking up from you is that you do want much more engagement.
Yep.
Dutch citizens.
Yeah, and one of the things that that will be occurring, for example, will be internal. We do our offshore tours. There will be some internal sort of visits with groups of MPs to particular communities to have specific engagement. There's some other stuff that it's been trialled and it's going to be sort of slowly made available as a virtual reality tour of this place, which I've looked at I don't know what version it is of it, and I wasn't nearly as impressed as everyone else was, because it just felt like I was walking around where I always walked over, pointed my head in particular directions. Well, so what? I've been doing this for the last 35 years. But actually it is quite realistic, and I think kids in particular will be very impressed with the cool things that they see as they point their head in different directions. I can't quite control the chamber that way yet.
That comment of yours about deferment to the leader is very worrying if you've seen that over time. Because that will only underline the whole point. It's us and them up there. They don't really understand us. And they just look after themselves. So that's the issue you have to overcome.
Yeah, and it's how people work that through, and I mean a lot will depend on on the quality of the leaders and their focus on engagement for their parties. But one of the things that I think is really important is quite separate to the to the arrangements that the individual parties have. The Parliament has a responsibility for doing
real representation.
Yep.
Which is and like a jumping bill, which you don't need to comment on, doesn't help.
I think it's I think what one might say it's part of the cost of coalition politics, and there are a number of them.
I'm interested to hear your thoughts on whether it's time to review the rules around petitions, particularly with putting them online, where people who have no connection to New Zealand but have a connection to a particular ideology maybe seek to influence New Zealand politics by using e-petitions.
Yeah, I'm not the expert on the on how we do the checking, but there's we have our sampling systems, and to ensure that we are, as far as possible, having people who are New Zealand citizens. Don't have to be electors, because we're actually interested in having some younger people do it. I think that, again, I'm sort of looking for help, but I think the systems as we've set them up are designed to stop the I was going to say bullshit, but I couldn't possibly speak of offshore influences in it. David?
Well, there is when you start up an e-petition, it's moderated, you can't publish it straight away. So you do have to, I mean, we aren't 100% sure the person is a real person, exactly they are where they say they are, but they do have to confirm it. They have to have a legitimate email address. And we do moderate what the petition is asking for, because there are some rules around what you can and can't ask for. Ones that are frivolous will go to the speaker and don't publish. Because there is a bit of a difference, which is, old hard copy petitions, you get the signatures if you like. If you didn't get any, it got no publicity. ones that you can publish online, everyone can see immediately. It kind of gives them some legitimacy. So we want to make sure they're, as much as we can, legitimate before they're published.
Look, I understand that, but that's not really the question that I was asking. It's more, you know, obviously the petitioner, you have some idea of who that person is, but it's actually the supporters. And, you know, if they generate significant media interest or social media interest in it, they could get significant support from people based in the UK who identify with the ideology, but don't at all identify with New Zealand politics.
That's true. Yep. I mean, that could happen with any petition. It's just very unlikely with one that's not online. And there's no requirement, you know, for the signatory to be New Zealander at all.
I think another thing that's possibly worth noting is that I don't know if there's necessarily any particular significance to the number of people who sign a petition. All petitions given the exact same consideration, whether or not it's signed by one person or 20,000.
Yeah. And one of the two petitions I referred to that took a long time to go through the system only had one, you know, as a petition of one person, and I think the other one was quite small too. It's sort of, it is the power of ideas, I hope, that you know, can work. Now I've got now to go and have a discussion with some business people on behalf of the Parliament. I apologise for running away. This is not a mutual boycott society.
As he leaves, I should say that this man called Scott Morrison, the new Prime Minister of Australia, Murray McCully's hard man. There you are.
Yes, who has a different standard of ethics and values to what we expect from
Indeed. Indeed, he did. And picking up that last point, when I first came here, one of the big events was the Manapuri petition, which was huge as a percentage of the population, and which did in fact have an effect by stopping the raising of the Manapuri Dam by another 20 metres. So petitions can occasionally work. And the interesting thing about that was it wasn't just a whole pile of greenies. There were an awful lot of conservative conservers were the real crunch people in that petition. This again, I've given Charlotte the full version of this, which is about 3 times as long as I'll talk to, but you can go through it if you really wish. David Solomon argued, and I thought this was a very good point to the ASPG conference in Brisbane, that parliaments like ours are, in a sense, the trustees of democracy and of the people's interests. And I think that's quite a useful way of thinking about parliaments. And voting turnouts have been declining, particularly among younger cohorts, and that suggests that parliaments like ours are decreasingly seen as living up to that trustee role. And if that's so, then liberal democracy is at risk, and I think that's the whole point of that conference topic in July. And that's all the more so if the information people are getting from and about Parliament is distorted or fragmented, if we are in fact living in this post-truth world. Because Parliament is the speaker, so the speaking place and the maker of the rules. So it's critical to civic well-being, and if it falls short, obviously civil well-being is damaged. And until a century and a half ago, and we need to remember, representative democracy is only one form of democracy, and I'll come back to that, but only a select elite were actually directly represented in Parliament. The rest acquiesced rather than directly consented. And that was because the crowd, that's the demos, from which the word democracy comes, was not to be trusted. And A.C. Grayling's book is really interesting on this point. He goes through in his first half of the book, second half I have problems with. The first half traces through the evolution of the notion of the demos and democracy. And he quotes Plato as saying that demos is a numerous body without a head, too vulnerable to being captured by the emotion of the moment, by the phenomenon of the madness of crowds. And the paper does a number of other quotations from the likes of Lee Kuan Yew and Sir Winston Churchill, one of the great destroyers of New Zealand people. The term madness of crowds comes from Charles Mackay's resonant 1841 book, Extraordinarily Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds, and it's well worth reading because it starts with about moral epidemics. We had one of them called the Global Financial Crisis. He starts with the South Sea Bubble, but democracy evolved as the working class evolved, and as Industrial Revolution built a new middle class, and the elites realised, and this is a pertinent point for today's issues with democracy, the elites realised that direct representation, that is, say, active consent, could safely be extended to these rising classes. And not only that, but they had to be if social order and cohesion was to be maintained. And over time, this evolved into, particularly after 1945, but earlier here, a domination by parties of the centre-left and centre-right, and they alternated in office and operated within informally understood policy boundaries. They could be pushed a bit to the left, a bit to the right, but within limits. And I've called this the bounded rationality. There was a high level of trust, and trust, as Fukuyama has said, is the glue of liberal democracies. Well, bounded rationality still reigns in this country. And a recent survey found, this by the IGPS, found a marked lift since 2016 in trust and confidence in government, ministers and MPs. And that's in real contrast with the northern democracies, where a growing number of people no longer feel represented by, nor do they trust the centre-left, centre-right cabal. And they see these parties as agents of a self-perpetuating detached elite, the other, not us. Those who are there, not here, if I paraphrase David Coulthardt's interesting take on this. The vehicles of protest, they range from the far left to the far right, and to the oddball, a party started by a comedian, is the strongest polling party in Italy. And from parties or movements to demagogues, such as Boris Johnson and someone I won't mention from the United States, or fresh-faced saviours like Emmanuel Macron or Jacinda Ardern. Even where the old centre-left and centre-right parties still seem to be running the show, as in Britain and the United States, it looks there, but those parties are deeply, and in my view, possibly existentially riven. In short, in liberal democracies, the crowd is no longer moderated by moderate parties, and the elites are accordingly agitated. But representative democracy, I have to emphasise, and it goes back a little bit to what Trevor's just been saying, sorry, the speaker has just been saying, is only one channel through which the demos exercises and moderates its will. And there've long been, and now there's a growing number of alternative ways to express opinion, to develop ways of thinking, to assemble and assess evidence, to build coalitions, to work through competing options for action, to reach consensus or a majority agreement and mandate action. And these range from riots and organised protests through petitions that attract the support from the crowd, to pressure and interest groups, and constitutional conventions, and more recently, citizens-initiated referendums, citizens' assemblies and juries, expert working groups, and collaborative governance consensus seeking by competing interest groups. This is quite a wide range of alternative ways of doing democracy. And the turn to populism amounts at least to a partial withdrawal of consent and acquiescence. And one reason is the new mechanisms digital technology has made available to the crowd and to those who seek to feed on and to influence the crowd. And far more populous crowds can now be reached and can interact across far greater distances than in the pre-digital era. And those connections are made faster than lightning. And the larger the crowd, the more irrational its members can be. And these new technologies have wreaked serious damage on the keeper of truth, the fourth estate, which provided channels of information to and from the citizens and their representatives, and so was a check on Parliament, however imperfect. The new era robber barons, Facebook, Google, Amazon, and other social media, have sucked much of the advertising lifeblood out of traditional media. They channel news according to their users' clicks, reinforcing preference, prejudice, and preconception. They carry bots, if you know what bots are. So real news is garbled and the spread of fake news is enabled. That takes us back to the title of this of that conference and the seminar. Well, that's the bad news. That's the fueling of fulsome madness of crowds with distorted, fabricated, and malicious ideas. And this is the post-truth. But there is also good news. The new media and other threads of the web also can and do enable and fuel a wisdom of crowds. They enable participation in ways that in the past were difficult to organise or not even imaginable. There is crowdfunding of new business startups, charities, and other ventures. In 2016, an iconic beach was rescued into public ownership through our website in which the crowd could join and contribute funds to. Pressure groups which used to organise through in-person meetings now operate digitally, and I give the examples of Just Speak and People Against Prisons. Informal movements can be much more easily generated, and there are a whole lot of international examples. I term this distributed democracy. And it's by analogy with distributed generation of electricity by householders, small groups, factories, building managers, photovoltaic cells, biofuels, wind turbines, and combined generation using heat and feeding that back into the grid, right? That's a distributed generation. Distributed democracy is good news for Parliament in two ways. First, even with electricity distribution, electricity generation, the need still exists for big generators and a grid. So likewise, maintaining social order needs central authority and the assignment of power, and so a national legislature and national government. The second good news is that while distributed democracy leaves room for the madness of crowds, it also makes room for the wisdom of crowds, and that wisdom can be superior to leaders' assumed wisdom. So we might say democracy is an interplay, a tension between the madness of crowds and the wisdom of crowds. Both have always been in play. Liberal democracy works well when the wisdom prevails over the madness. And so far in liberal democracies, even in northern liberal democracies, madness has not vanquished wisdom. The foundations, in my view, are still sound, even if the superstructure needs repairs. So there is case for optimism, and Steven Pinker has argued with mountain ranges of evidence that humans across most of the world are treating each other better century by century and decade by decade. And that contrast, I have to say, with the relentless negative tone of the traditional media with clickbaits and entertainment and so on, and that negative tone was no better encapsulated than the first words of the New York Times emailed weekend briefing of May 20 on the royal wedding. Let's start with some good news for a change. Well, Pinker overstates his case, but I think the underlying point, has merit. If so, there is life and value yet in liberal democracies, upsides that are worth developing, including in the capacity for distributed democracy to build the wisdom of crowds. And if that is to be so, parliaments will be critical to building that wisdom and quelling that madness. So a quick list of what the New Zealand Parliament might do in addition to what the Speaker is talking about. First, stamp out bad behaviour. Question time, despite some innovative attempts by Speaker Mallard, is a disgrace to Parliament and to the nation. It is a sufficient reason on its own not to vote, or at least not to vote for incumbents. Partisanship cannot be eliminated because politics begets tribes with different ambitions for themselves, their supporters, and the country. But airing those differences should be by principled debate and not snide, personalised, denigrating, and partisan argument and catcalling. Second, rework debate in much strengthened committee structure, going beyond where Speaker Mallard was going, to get more focus on improving legislation and informing it with disinterested, expert, especially scientific evidence. And my own sense is that we probably need a 150-member parliament in order to do that. Third, help MPs behave more like the responsible representatives they need to be by beefing up resources, good salaries, more administrative support in Parliament and electorates, or in the case of list MPs in the area they choose as their base, strong research support, including funded access to private and academic experts and scientists, and access to departmental advice. Chris Hipkins' glib dismissal, I'm using mild words here, glib dismissal on 6 September of the Appropriations Review Committee report, and I think it's a good one, on resourcing MPs as dead in the water, demeaned Parliament in a way that invites distrust. Chris Hipkins' title, Leader of the House, suggests that he's the guardian of Parliament. But actually, in saying what he said, he was acting as an officer of the executive, lording it over MPs and Parliament. And for as long as this overlordship persists, Parliament will earn its growing disrepute. Mindless carping at Simon Bridges doing his proper job around, media carping, sorry, at Simon Bridges doing his proper job going around the country listening, and Jacinda Ardern participating in this strategically important South Pacific forum doesn't help. So the media could help too. Fourth, reduce voter cynicism about who really runs the show, that's the shadowy figures in behind political parties, by greatly increasing public funding of political parties and tightening rules limiting private donations and requiring information on donations to be widely distributed publicly by way of social media, so people who don't normally engage in politics can see who is paying whom. Fifth, related to that, generously publicly fund something like Radio New Zealand to produce a platform of factual, fact-checked information that other serious media and even social media can draw on. Also, publicly subsidise selected serious media websites such as Newsroom. Sixth, related to that, start looking for ways to mandate the curation of social media and hold the curators to account. Obvious mechanisms are tax and regulation, but regulators will need to be very nimble, fast and innovative to keep up with changes in technologies, algorithms and platforms, and that means competing on price with the tech industry. Seventh, set up an independent fiscal commission appointed by the whole of Parliament, that looks as though it might happen, and convert some other commissions into parliamentary commissions similarly appointed. But first, rewrite the appointment, dismissal and oversight rules of such commissions to ensure proper, open, just process. And some of you will know what I mean by that. 8, adopt the principle of subsidiarity and enable and mandate local councils to take more power and do more. Councils vary greatly in inequality, but they are closer to their segments of the crowd than the central parliament is. If well-resourced, councils might prove able to develop internet-based ways of engaging and drawing from the crowd positively to develop wise policies and programs the crowd can see, respect and value as relevant, and see that they are not the preserve of a distant elite. Parliament could learn from such experiments and innovations. So 9th, following on from that, start to take Parliament and decision-making to the people, and this is what Trevor Mallard was talking about, through innovative use of digital technology to inform, consult, engage, and involve voters in more complex decisions than binary yes-no referendums. That could mean taking collaborative governance, citizens, juries and assemblies and deliberative polling much wider than small samples and securing voter responses. Why not do new ways of doing democracy if the alternative is outdated, outmanoeuvred, outsmarted and illegitimate parliaments? How all this evolves, and especially whether facts and common sense, which are the nearest we can get to truth in politics, prevail, will be a large factor in the evolution of trust in Parliament. The fundamental point is that democracy is the property of the demos. And the optimist in me says that ultimately the decisions of the demos rest on the wisdom of crowds. There's room for optimism that the wisdom of crowds may yet trump the madness of crowds, and if so, liberal democracy has a long way to go yet.
Thank you very much, Colin. We'll move to Greg's presentation and do questions at the end for both presenters.
well from standing orders lying there. Okay. Thank you, Charlotte. Tēnā katoa. Good evening, everyone. I'm Greg Cotmore, and I work at the Office of the Clerk. And I'm part of the team responsible for broadcasting Parliament's proceedings on radio and Parliament TV, locally known as PTV. I've been at the Office of the Clerk since late 2011, and with some deference to my colleagues, I'm quite possibly the only person around who's watched PTV almost every sitting day from start to end for nearly 7 years. In that time, PTV has covered 3 openings of Parliament, 7 budgets, 529 question times as of today, 61 maiden statements and 46 valedictories. It's enough to turn you into a parliamentary nerd, and I guess I've got there. Tonight I'll talk to you about research I undertook in 2016 for the Parliamentary Law, Practice and Procedure course at the University of Tasmania. The research looks at the behaviour of MPs in New Zealand's debating chamber over the 10 years before the start of PTV in July of 2007 and during the following decade. And while I don't claim the study to be based on rock-solid science, my findings, I hope, provide the basis for further informed discussion. Beforehand, I'll give some background about the development and operation of PTV. But before I start, just a quick straw poll, show of hands. Cameras in the chamber had no influence on members, a negative influence, a positive influence. Who thinks they had no influence? Okay, who thinks they had a negative influence? Okay, who thinks they had a positive influence? Right, okay, good night, we can go back. We'll see how that stacks up. The genesis of...
It depends if the word negative meant that they said less than they really meant to say.
Couldn't comment, Colin, I couldn't comment. The genesis of my research paper was the looming 10th anniversary of PTV in July of 2017, and comments from some parliamentary old hands that the behaviour of members had improved since the start of PTV. My research started with a quotation from British Labour politician Austin Mitchell. Why Austin Mitchell, I hear you say. The former MP is no stranger to Kiwis. He lived in New Zealand from 1959 to 67, and he wrote a popular satirical book about life down under called The Half-Gallon Quarter-Acre Pavlova Paradise, which I had the pleasure of reading when I was about 13. Mitchell was a vocal advocate for admitting TV cameras to the UK House of Commons, and he got his wish on the 21st of November 1989. Writing not long after the start of TV coverage, Mitchell judged it to be mediocre, but predicted it would improve. Quote, "Coverage will get more interesting and television will become addictive. Fears will prove groundless. MPs will wonder why they wasted so much time resisting it in the first place." Of course, he was writing well before the development of 16:9 warts and all high definition TV. We can see Margaret Thatcher in the good old days of 4:3 and Theresa May in glorious widescreen. An online article in the Telegraph published 25 years later asked, have TV cameras in Parliament made political debate coarser? The article claimed behaviour is no worse than before cameras arrived. Rather, quote, if anything, MPs are more watchful and fewer MPs are thrown out of the chamber today for bad behaviour. This supports the idea that TV cameras have had a positive influence. So much for the UK. What about the New Zealand experience? Prior to the arrival of PTV, television coverage in the chamber was limited to occasional filming for prime time news by Television New Zealand and TV3. They would set up their own ad hoc facilities in the galleries. Problem is the cameras and the microphone booms were bulky, noisy, and an intrusive distraction. Furthermore, parliamentary rules restricted filming to only the member with the call or the speaker. So viewed from above, the resulting footage featured mostly coiffured hairdos and bald heads. Not exactly must-see TV. In its 2003 review, the Standing Orders Committee proposed installing small robotic cameras under the galleries, remotely controlled from a studio on the precinct. Being closer to eye level, the coverage would be a dramatic improvement on the gallery shots. One of the report's other recommendations was to stop broadcasters using their own cameras once PTV was up and running. Predictably, this led to a stoush with the news media. A report of the Standing Orders Committee in June 2007 made the case for loosening the rules for filming. The report also relented and allowed the TV channels to continue filming from the galleries. On the proviso, they adhered to new and more liberal rules for TV coverage, which were incorporated into standing orders. PTV began broadcasting on 17 July 2007. It is operated by professional TV staff under contract to the Office of the Clerk, and it's available on 3 digital platforms, which of course you all know, Freeview, Sky and Vodafone. It's also streamed on Parliament's website and is available through Parliament's mobile device app called Virtual House. Which if you haven't got it already, you can download it free from the App Store. PTV broadcasts all House proceedings live and repeats question time twice each day. For my research, 4 comparisons were undertaken that compiled data from 10 years before the start of PTV and the following decade. I looked at members ejected from the chamber, withdrawals and apologies, points of order, questions to members. Although cause and effect is inferred, the comparisons offer a measurable glimpse at 3 potential outcomes. The presence of TV cameras had no influence, or had a negative influence, not of Colin's variety, or had a positive influence. Members ejected from the chamber. Some people might remember that occasion. In New Zealand, the Speaker has the ability under Standing Order 89 to order any member whose conduct is highly disorderly to withdraw immediately from the House. Over 20 years, there have been 382 ejections. 79% occurred before PTV started, and 71% were from the opposition benches. The 47th Parliament of 2002 to 2005 was particularly noteworthy for having 40 ministers ejected. This total contrasts with the post-PTV figure of only 10 ministers ejected from the chamber over 9 years, comprising 3 parliaments. You also note that the 7 triennial general elections since 1999, which are denoted with a little triangle, and the explosion of ejected members following the 1999, 2002 and 2005 elections. Since the start of PTV, misbehaviour in the chamber after an election seems to have subsided. Overall, it does appear that the presence of the PTV cameras coincides with improved behaviour of members. One quirky result indicates that being ejected from the chamber does not necessarily hinder an MP's parliamentary prospects. 6 MPs in the last Parliament, the 51st, feature in the list of top 10 offenders from 1997 to 2017. And without giving any order away, they do include a former Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Bill English, and the current Deputy Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Winston Peters, and the Right Honourable Trevor Mallard, who on the 7th of November 2017 was elected the Speaker of the 52nd Parliament. Withdrawals and apologies. Long-standing Speaker's rulings allow the presiding officer to require a member to withdraw a statement and, if required, give an apology unreservedly. And we had an example yesterday of an unreserved apology. This is one of the most effective procedural mechanisms to maintain order when the House becomes agitated. Over 20 years, 802 members were required to withdraw and apologise. 65% occurred before PTV started, and 24% were made by ministers. From a total of 193 ministers asked to withdraw and apologise, 75% were made pre-PTV. Again, like comparison 1, it appears the TV cameras may have improved behaviour, particularly that of ministers. Points of order. When properly used, a point of order gives a member the ability to raise a procedural issue with the Speaker. Nevertheless, in an adversarial debating chamber, they are often used to disrupt the flow of an opponent's speech. Due to the large number and frequency of points of order, this study restricted itself to points of order raised during question time in the week of the annual debate. From a total of 399 points of order over 20 years, 55% occurred post-PTV. So any anxiety that members would feel restrained by TV cameras or be encouraged to showboat is not reflected by the data. Questions to members. Understanding Order 379, a member may be asked about any bill, motion or public matter connected with the business of the House of which the member has charge. It is asked immediately after oral questions to ministers. So in television parlance, this is prime time viewing. Presumably, an MP wishing to maximise TV coverage would take advantage of the standing order. Did they? Over 20 years, there have been 400 questions to members. 62% were post-PTV. So it seems TV cameras have enticed members to make the most of this media opportunity. This is the only result that shows an increase. Arguably, it is a positive outcome as the viewing public learn more about parliamentary business. However, a more cynical interpretation would be that members have figured out how to maximise the TV opportunity of question time. Indeed, this possibility did not go unnoticed by the Speaker of the 51st Parliament, the Right Honourable David Carter, who was critical about the use of members' questions as a means of raising publicity on a bill that is placed on the order paper. So from these 4 comparisons, it can be reasonably deduced that the presence of TV cameras in the chamber has overall improved the behaviour of MPs, particularly ministers. Likewise, the ability of members to function in the chamber has not been impeded. Arguably, they are now more positively engaged. The Office of the Clerk commissions biannual surveys to rate the media used by the public to access Parliament. And as helpful as these are in evaluating public engagement, they don't offer any data specific to how MPs value PTV. To fill the gap, I ran a survey monkey poll. 8 questions were emailed to party whips and chiefs of staff to distribute to members and support staff. While the response rate was low, it was representative of all major parties. Nearly 97% claimed to watch PTV and 70% use footage on social media. To the question, how do you rate the value of PTV to you personally, or to the institution of Parliament, or to the nature of democratic representation? That's a triple-legged question, I know. It wouldn't go down too well with the Speaker. There was a strong positive response of 98%, with 65% valuing it as essential and 33% as very important. When asked if they were aware of the TV cameras in the chamber, 82% of MPs answered yes. Asked if the cameras made them feel uncomfortable or self-conscious, only 1 MP answered yes. The combination of usage and perceived value suggests that PTV is greatly valued by MPs and their staff. PTV is a popular communications component in today's social media mix. and TV coverage in the chamber does not adversely affect MPs' behaviour in the House. Alas, the public's perception of Parliament, at least through the lens of the media, isn't so encouraging. This cartoon appeared in the Dominion Post on the first day the House sat in 2016. I have to say, I felt this representation to be somewhat facile and disingenuous, especially when we compare our House to some other parliaments. Yes, even mild-mannered Japan. The results of comparisons 1 through to 4 appear to indicate MPs these days are less rowdy, better engaged, and more media savvy than before PTV. Similarly, the survey results appeared to confirm that MPs and staff are prolific users of PTV for their social media channels and consider PTV to be a significant part of New Zealand's democratic landscape. So where to from here? After a decade, PTV has proven to be a professional and balanced provider of official TV coverage. However, to encourage greater viewer engagement, a wider variety of camera shots, including discretionary close-ups, would better convey the atmosphere. This is not to say the rules should be liberalised to accommodate the media's interests. The dignity of Parliament is paramount, and its proceedings should not be reduced to snappy headlines or clickbait. It's to be hoped that one day the Standing Orders Review Committee will concur that MPs can trust the PTV operators to both maintain their dignity and to also make coverage more engaging for the public. And maybe even, as Austin Mitchell once envisaged, addictive. You are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Greg. So I'll now open to questions for either Greg or Colin or both.
Just to throw out some maybe counterintuitive or perhaps devil advocates questions for you, Greg. Isn't it possible that the standards in Parliament have risen in the sense of what's expected? So what the Speaker is expecting has gone up. And so the behaviour hasn't necessarily changed, but after television came in, the Speaker is now only clamping down less. So that's one possibility. I think it's doubtful, but
yes.
I just wonder if you can...
looking at the line in the sand that was straight through 17 July of 2007, and what struck me was just the data change.
Absolutely.
So whether that's coincidental.
Okay, isn't there another case to be made that maybe Parliament should be colourful, it should be robust, it should be rambunctious, and that cameras have killed off the colourfulness and the raw excitement that the public want, and that we've ended up with a bland sort of Parliament that really suits the politicians, and it's all about propaganda rather than real debate and real raw.
I mean, I'm quietly just chiseling away, trying to advocate for increasing the coverage. I watch Canberra quite a lot for my sins, and the coverage there is, especially I was watching just the last few weeks, the way that they managed to show, I think, a far more variety of shots, especially reaction shots, over the shoulder of the former Prime Minister, looking at Mr. Bill Shorten. Those are all really great TV shots and quite engaging, I think, for the viewers. But they do it in a way that doesn't necessarily, I think, demean the members. I think some might say that the members in Canberra are very adept at doing that themselves. But I don't think that the cameras have stultified that. I think there's room to go, more room for expressiveness. Yeah, I think, and it's also a thing that you have to remember that that it's being run by professionals. They know what makes good, engaging TV. So I'm with the professionals. That's just my background. I trust them that they are not going to send me to sleep, and nor are they going to show anything outrageous like in the Ukraine. Wouldn't put that to air.
Greg, one thing that might encourage a bit is that the Speaker said, prior to being Speaker, but in the last review standing orders, he's quite keen to get rid of Appendix D to standing orders altogether. We've taken out the prohibition on using footage for satire. That's now okay.
Yeah.
But he said, and he reminded me again today, you know, he is in favour of loosening things up quite a lot there. Because they apply to everyone who's filming, not just the official providers, but the news channels as well.
That's great news.
Now, he can't just do that by himself, but you know, there is hope, I think, when we about a year on from now.
I think that's just an extension, David, of what Mary Harris, I think, said before she left in her tenure. It was that we're all grown up now. We're big, wearing our big trousers, and so we can handle this. And so that the old satire, ridicule, denigration clause gone. The world hasn't ended. You know, the sky hasn't fallen in.
Greg, given that you do watch the TV probably more than most of us, do you find that you see members actively trying to get on TV a lot to raise their profile?
No, I can't say I have, but I won't say who the member is, but you know, there are members who have got a television background, and one of the creepiest things is when they stare down the barrel of the camera, like the camera up there, and looking right at the camera, and you're watching as a viewer, and it just gives me the chill. So when we do our induction program with new members, I always say that, you know, about the cameras and don't look down the cameras.
Do you have viewer numbers?
We don't participate in any viewer diary or system like that. We do have the biannual research that asks a small sample about how they engage with Parliament, and that includes the website, TV, radio, and those figures really, Colin, they're extrapolated. So
I would assume that it's rather small numbers who actually actively watch.
I have to agree with you. Though question time is our highlight. If only from the anecdotal evidence that we get in terms of phone calls to the office, emails.
Yeah.
We don't get too many emails about bills and about tax at night.
But one of the things in the new engagement strategy for Parliament is to have metrics for all of the ways they're engaged. So we're going to measure them and set goals to grow them. So we'll actually know if we're getting more viewers or not.
Well, that's a strong argument for improving question time, and yes. I have a very strong view about it, but which is anyway, I think.
What is your view of question time?
What I said earlier, that essentially, what are the words that I use? Eh?
Disgrace.
Yeah,
Would you get rid of
what question time should be is the exploration, the holding of the government to account, and doing that in a sensible and inquiring way. What it is just a catcall fight. It's just a cat fight. And I think it's awful. And I think they behave like, by and large, not all of them, and the Greens by and large don't fit this category, but they behave like teenagers. And I think it's a bad advertisement for Parliament. And if most of the people who are watching Parliament PTV watch Question Time, they will be getting an awful view of what Parliament does. not a positive view at all. But that's just my view. And I listen to Question Time. I occasionally watch it on my iPhone but mostly I listen. And it's got worse, in my view, over the past 10 years or so, in terms of what should be sensible, grown-up exploration of what the government's doing for the benefit of the people. But actually, it's for the benefit of my ego, right? And my potential to get either stay in Parliament, stay in government, or get into government. And it's a lot of denigration. And I just find that.
Can I ask, what do you think, you know how Minister Colin came under fire? Do you reckon that's part of the problem with Question Time? The way that played out?
No. The way it continued to play out, yes. The inquiry into whether she was behaving as a minister as she should is entirely valid. But the way that it was pursued was denigratory and destructive, right? And there are different ways of doing this. Now, maybe politics is so bad that this is what politics is, in which case there will be growing distrust. And the fact that it's now much more visible and accessible means that people can develop their distrust more readily.
Hi, I'm interested to know your thoughts on how the likes of NGOs and social movements can most effectively engage with Parliament and how we can make those interactions as transparent as possible. This goes to the lobbying bill approach, does it? Mm-hmm. Look, I haven't thought carefully enough about this. And the bill that the Green MP, whose name's gone out of my head.
Lee Walker?
Yeah, who she produced in the end was probably not very workable. Because lobbying can either be upfront or it can be behind the scenes. So if you want to try and catch what the behind the scenes stuff, you won't. So should all lobbyists be registered? Should all of their appointments be registered and so on? Well, logically, yes, but how practical it is, I haven't done enough recent work on this to offer you a considered opinion. But it should be, the OIA gives you some access to the information, and it should be as transparent as practicable, because you do need to know who's influencing who, if you can. And it's fair enough that people influence politicians. That's part of politics, of course, and that ranges all the way from private interests across to not-for-profits, local councils, whoever. Yeah. So it may come down to whether Parliament should be subject to the OIA, and Geoffrey Palmer argues it should be. And I haven't formulated an opinion on that, because Parliament does have special place and special privileges, and how that fits with the privileges I don't really have a considered view on. I suspect, however, that the Holly Walker initiative will keep coming back, and at some point there will be some sort of official measure, some sort of legislated measure, or standing orders measure.
Cool. Well, thank you everyone for coming. In a few days, we'll send out to everyone who's come tonight a link to our new website, and you can just sign up online and make payment online as well if you're not covered by corporate membership. And we'll also add a link to the live footage of the presentation, and, well, it won't be live then, and Colin's paper and the PowerPoints of Greg and the speaker. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.